Alright, so in D&D, there are certain creatures that every dungeon master can rely on. Guards are one of them. Almost every setting, from bustling cities to small villages, needs a form of law enforcement to keep the peace. Even evil rulers rely on guards to enforce their tyrannical policies. That's where things get interesting. But herein lies the problem. The game only gives us one guard stat block. Just one. And let's be real, it's not going to pose much of a challenge for your players. Especially if they're anything above, I don't know, let's say 2nd level. Whether they're the heroes or the villains in your campaign, most seasoned adventurers will make quick work of a single guard. So how can we make guards feel more varied and impactful? Today I'm here to fix that. I'll be sharing a variety of guard stat blocks that you can incorporate into your game world, whether you're running high fantasy cities with noble defenders or a dystopian regime with corrupt enforcers. I've got something that'll work for you, and hey, if mine don't fit your setting, I hope they can at least spark some ideas for your own creations. All the guards featured in this video will be available on my Patreon and Discord for free, so go ahead and grab them. But if you're feeling a bit like a wealthy merchant with some spare coin jingling in your pocket, I've got a special deal for you. For those of you that subscribe to one of my paid tiers, I'll throw in some extra stat blocks. That's right, you'll get even more guards to protect your players. Think of it as an investment, like buying a guard dog, but with more paperwork and no fur. Okay, so to really hammer home that Wizards of the Coast gave us guards as something of an afterthought, let's look at where they put them in the 2014 Monster Manual. We have to flip all the way to the back to page 347, where we get a tiny stat block and a single sentence of lore, if you can even call it that. And this sentence states that guards include members of a city watch, sentries in a citadel or fortified town, and the bodyguards of merchants and nobles. Now, I get it, guards don't need to have lore per se, but it feels like there could have been more effort put into such a common creature. They're everywhere. You're gonna get them in every campaign setting. Even in the 9 hells themselves, you'll get guards. Now, they're gonna be devils torturing the souls of the damned, but they're still guards. So, let's look at the 2014 stat block, which will be very quick to go over because it's very simplistic. Alright, so as I'm looking at the guard stat block here, they could be any humanoid race, any alignment, which is good. That seems about right. For their armor class, they have a chain shirt and a shield. Now, looking at the whole stat block, what they really look like they were trying to do was make these guards similar to how a medieval militia would be. However, in medieval times, I don't think militia commonly even had armor. They just had a giant tower shield and a spear, most likely. So this is sort of like halfway in between with the chain shirt. So the AC is a little higher than normal for the average creature, I guess you could say. But the hit points are really low, so we have 2d8 plus 2. Now, that's fine for a low-level guard. It almost represents that they're just slightly better than a commoner. 30 feet movement speed, that seems about right. And then the ability score lineup, this really kind of hammers home that these are just militia. They're really not anything better than a commoner. 13 strength, 12 dexterity, 12 constitution, 10 intelligence, 11 wisdom, and 10 charisma. Now, a commoner stat block has 10s across the board. So this looks to me like they just took a commoner, they gave it slightly increased stats to show that they maybe are more capable humanoids that are more well suited for defending a city or a village. But like I was saying, these seem more like guards for a village than a big city. If you have a metropolis, these guards are not really gonna find a place in a metropolis. They do have a perception skill, which is good. As a guard, you're probably going to be regularly on the lookout for things. They have a passive perception of 12 They speak any one language, usually common. I would honestly just say they speak any language native to the area that they're in. So that's kind of, I don't know, that's a nitpick, but to me, I feel like they should just speak any language that's native to their area. Now, they are CR 1/8, so yeah, like I said, if your 10th level player characters are just running rampant around this village, what are these guards going to do to stop them? If the player characters walked into a village and the village had, 40 CR 1/8 guards, one fireball is going to kill as many of them that can fit into the radius of a fireball, which is 30 feet if I'm not mistaken. And then the rest of them are going to go down in one hit from everything else, and they don't even have multi-attack. As we move into the actions, which is a single action with a spear. So they have an unreliable ranged attack, but at least they have a ranged attack. So the spear just does 1d6 piercing damage on a hit. If they use it with two hands, it does 1d8, and then they can throw it also for 1d6 piercing damage, but if they throw it, they then have no weapon, because these guards have no sidearm. So that was sort of the things that I was thinking about when I was looking at the guard's stat block, is the fact that they lack sidearms, consistent ranged weaponry, and a cohesive theme to them. So let's look at my first guard variant that I've created, and we're going to go over that. And yeah, this video is going to be a little bit different, so just bear with me. Guard Militia. Alright, so for my first guard that I would like to showcase here, this is my version of the low-level guard that we just looked at in the monster manual. So my low-level guard actually has less armor class than the 2014 guard, but it has slightly more hit points. Now, I've been playing Manor Lord when I first started making these reworks to kind of get a feel for like medieval-esque troops, because that game is sort of historically accurate. I also did some research. So really, militia are not going to have really good armor unless the person that is employing them is wealthy. So I think for the average militia, they would have whatever armor scraps that they could scrounge up if they had their own money to pay for a helmet. And then, they're going to have a shield and a weapon supplied to them. So you can see that their AC is 13 instead of 16 now, but their hit points are 16 instead of 11. So slightly higher hit points, slightly lower AC. That is going to cause them to get hit easier, but, they're militia. That's kind of their job. They are fodder guards, but they're still dangerous in numbers, and you'll see that here soon. So ability scores have not changed, so I felt those were fine. They don't have any additional skills. They do have a special trait that I gave them called Arrest. The guard can automatically grapple detained creatures, and creatures grappled by the guard have disadvantage on escape attempts. So these guards are specialists at detaining people if there's a riot going on, or if there's criminals that are running rampant and these guards chase them down and detain them. They probably have some sort of training or experience at holding humanoids at least down so that they can be arrested. So that's my idea with that. Now let's move into the actions, because we're going to have a lot more things to do, but no extra action economy. That's important with guards, is you don't want to give them too much action economy and make them overpowered. So the spear has a simple stab attack and the throw attack. So the spear actually hasn't changed. I just condensed it, and as I do, I like to tell you the things that the spear can do. So it has a stab attack, or you can throw it. Now if they throw their spear, they actually do have a sidearm that they will have as a backup weapon, which to me makes sense. So they have studded clubs. These are just clubs with studs in them. I will put an image up on screen as an example. They pull these out. These are one-handed, think like a nightstick sort of, but medieval. I feel like the studs in it kind of give them the more militaristic-esque feel, and you'll see that the studs in them give it a +1 to its flat damage, but not to its attacks. So it is a +3 to hit, and it does 1d4 +2. Now, with its strength mod, it should be +1, you might be saying, but because there's studs in this club, it's a +2. So just 1d4 damage, really nothing to write home about. They do have a shield. Obviously, they should be able to utilize it in some way, shape, or form. They're not professional fighters by any stretch of the imagination, so their shield can do a shield shove attack, and this doesn't do damage, as you can see, because guards aren't necessarily there to hurt people. They're there to enforce laws. So I feel like shield shoving would be more befitting of a guard than actually trying to hurt somebody with their shield. So on a hit, medium or smaller creature must make a DC 11 strength save. If it fails, it's pushed back 5 feet. If that fails by 5 or more, they fall prone. So just a simple attack. That's their whole action to do that. That's really, if you're gonna role play a guard, I feel like you should be doing something like that before they actually start resorting to using their weapons in a violent manner. Now, their final piece of equipment here is a hempen rope. So these guards aren't wealthy enough to have actual manacles or equipment that is meant to be used for arresting people. So the best that these guys could muster up is probably going to be just rope. So in order for them to use this, they have to use it on an incapacitated or a willing creature. So willing as in it's surrendering. It has a reach of 5 feet. The rope has an AC of 10. It has an HP of 5. It's immune to all damage except slashing, fire, and acid. If you do any damage other than slashing, it harms the creature tied up for the same amount of damage dealt. Pretty straightforward. Now, they can do 2 things with this hempen rope. They can detain a creature, or they can fully restrain it. Detaining is the thing that they're able to do in combat if they incapacitate it. So they have to essentially beat the creature unconscious in order to use this. So they can use this on like an ogre, for example, because it says a large or smaller creature's hands. Now, large or smaller, that means from large down to tiny, not just large and small. So it's large, medium, small, tiny. Creatures' hands are bound with 3 feet of rope. While bound this way, they cannot use their hands or cast spells with somatic components. If not being grappled by a guard, the creature can use its action to attempt to escape the bindings a number of times equal to its con mod per day. And then the escape DC is 20. The reason why it's so high is if it was lower than that, if it was just, I don't know, a 13 to escape, what point would they have to detain a creature if it could just easily break out? If it was a DC 13, that means just your average everyday teenager could get tied up in this rope and then just snap the rope. So it has to take a great feat of strength to snap out of a binding like that. So I made it 20, so you're going to have to do a Hail Mary roll to bust out of these. Now, the creature can move its hands in front of itself with a DC 15 acrobatics check, and if they succeed that check, they can hold one-handed weapons, interact with most objects, and then they can now cast spells with somatic components. Their attacks still have disadvantage, and they cannot use heavy or two-handed weapons, however. So you are at a disadvantage when your hands are bound with rope. Now, if the guard spends a minute, they can fully restrain a large or smaller creature. And now, while fully restrained, this is essentially they're hog tying you while you're laying on the ground. They have the restrained condition. They cannot use their hands or cast spells with somatic components. The creature can use its action to attempt to escape its bindings with disadvantage a number of times equal to its con mod per day. And this is a DC 25 strength save. So once you run out of those attempts to escape, it's like you're tired, you're too exhausted to continue to keep attempting to escape. So that's about what I had for a militia guard. Now, I wanted to make something that would be useful in a scenario where the entire town is summoning the militia to attack a threat, or, you know, if your players get essentially D&D's equivalent to a 5-star wanted level, they're going to have the whole guard force mobilized on them. Now, let's look at my next iteration of this. Okay, so this is my take on a horde stat block. So similar to a swarm, a horde is instead a group of humanoids. So these aren't going to be tiny beasts. These are a gargantuan horde of medium humanoids. So this is a levy of militia. Their AC is still the same. Their HP is incredibly high now, because you essentially look at each hit die as the number of men in the horde. So because there are 16 hit die, that means there are 16 guys in this horde, or 16 troops in this horde. So they do have a bloodied condition, you will see, just like a swarm stat block does. So moving into the ability scores, the strength is immensely higher. It increased by 7. So from a 13 to a 20, this guard militia levy is much stronger and going to be harder to deal with. So they have a strength saving throw proficiency, so you're not going to be able to just overpower this group of men easy. They have vulnerabilities now. So area of effect spells or multi-target attacks and spells deal double damage to the militia because there's a group of people. So now multi-target attacks doesn't mean multi-attack. It means an attack that can hit more than one creature at the same time. So don't get that confused with multi-attack. So their resistances, however, are single target attacks and spells. Now, they have all the immunities that a swarm would have: charmed, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, prone, restrained, stunned. They are not immune to being blinded, though, so you could still blind them with like a smoke aura or some sort. Let's look at the special traits and see how this horde works. So the horde can occupy another creature's space and move through openings large enough for a medium humanoid. It is immune to effects that alter its form and cannot regain hit points or gain temporary hit points. They have reactive. The horde can take one reaction on every turn in combat. They have overwhelming mass. The horde has advantage on attack rolls against creatures they share a space with. When the horde uses its action to make an attack, it can target up to 4 creatures of its choice within range of its attack rolls, using the same attack roll for all targets. So, essentially, TLDR, every time the horde makes an attack, it can target up to 4 creatures with that one attack. It's not multi-attack, you're not rolling 4 separate times. It's a double-edged sword, so if you roll a nat 20 with this militia levy, they are going to crit up to 4 creatures at the same time. But at the same time, if you roll a 1, they're going to miss all 4 targets, or up to 4 targets. So it is a double-edged sword, but that just speeds up combat because 5e already has slow combat. You don't want to make 4 attacks, especially if you're using multiple militia levies like this. If you had like 3 militia levies, that's 12 attack rolls you'd have to make for all 3 of them total. That gets really annoying after a while. So I think 1 attack roll can hit up to 4 creatures. Makes it much more simple. They have a special trait here. This is a negative special trait, so this is low morale. At the start of each of its turns while bloodied, if no commanding officer is within 60 feet, the horde must make a DC 13 wisdom save. On a failure, it has to use all its movement to escape as far from combat as possible, dashing if able for the next minute. If unable to move, it takes the dodge action. So they rout from combat. You'll also see that the charisma mod has decreased by 2 because I feel like mob mentality should actually make the mob less cohesive. So let's get into the actions now. They have spears, plural. They have two types of attacks with these. They have a wave of stabs, so it's just, this is their stab attack. It does 4d6 instead of 1d6 damage. They can't two-hand them because they're probably going to be fighting as a unit with their shields out. You can just change that d6 to a d8 if you want to say they're using them two-handed, but just for simplicity's sake, it doesn't state if they're using them with two hands, because it would just be more text and make it annoying to read. And then if they're bloodied, so if they're half hit points or fewer, they only deal 2d6 damage. Now, Hail of Spears, this is if they throw their spears, so they can do this once, and then afterwards they can't do this again because they're losing their spears. And yes, this is as if the whole horde is throwing their spears all at once. So, Hail of Spears. The horde launches a volley of spears in a 10-foot radius up to 60 feet away. Each creature in the radius must make a DC 17 dexterity save. On a failure, they take 8d6 piercing damage. If the horde is bloodied, they will only take 4d6 piercing damage. And then if they succeed the save, they take half damage. And then after the horde uses Hail of Spears, they cannot use their spears, period, afterwards. So yeah, it makes sense. They throw their spears, they don't have them anymore, they can't use them. Let's go to the studded clubs. Now there's multiple men swinging studded weapons. So we have Surge of Bashes. It does 4d4 on a hit, and it's +4 because the regular studded club gives you an additional +1 to damage because there's 4 guys swinging. It's +4. That was my logic with that. So it does 4d4 bludgeoning damage. If they're bloodied, it does 2d4. Now, Village Justice. This is an interesting ability. So if the horde moves into creature's space, this is a dangerous ability. So this is called Village Justice. So each larger or smaller creature in the horde space has to make a dexterity saving throw, DC 17. On a failure, they take 8d4 bludgeoning damage, and if the horde's bloodied, it's only 4d4. They are knocked prone and they are restrained while they are in the horde space. The escape DC is 17, and if they succeed, they take half damage and they're not restrained. Now, if they do knock you unconscious with this, they can choose to leave you stable, because this is like the militia is trying to quell a mob, or they're trying to quell infighting, or your player characters. Your player characters, just robbed a village vault and they come running out. The militia swarms them, surrounds them, and they start beating them with their clubs, trying to get them to surrender, and they're going to try to hold them down forcefully. That's sort of my idea with that. So that's going to cover the low level guards. Now we'll look at a sort of higher level guard next. City Guard. So here's guards for your actual cities. Now these could cover up to a metropolis. I feel like these guards fit in pretty much anywhere where you have a city. Now these guards have an AC of 17. Their hit points are 27, which is higher, but it's not insanely high. So your player characters who are fighters and stuff like that could still cut swaths through these guards, but they're going to have a lot more that they can do damage-wise, which makes them a little bit more formidable. So you can increase that if you want to. I like to keep health a little bit on the lower side for lower level creatures, and then on the higher end of things, I actually think creatures need way more hit points. But you'll see the ability scores have increased across the board for the most part. Saving throws, these guards actually have saving throw proficiencies. They have skill proficiencies, so they can insight check better, investigate better, and they can perceive, the same, but they have higher wisdom, so their perception checks are higher. And you can see my thing says native, or for languages, any native language to the area. Now, people kept saying guards should be able to have pack tactics because they fight in a unit, and I agreed, so I gave them pack tactics. So if you're not familiar with what Pack Tactics does, it gives the creature advantage on attack rolls against an enemy if their ally is within 5 feet of that enemy and the ally is not incapacitated in some way. So it gives them that feel that they have fought together, they have experience fighting as a unit. So multiple guards are more than likely always going to be fighting at the same time. We have a fighting style. This comes from fighters, I believe, and paladins get this, fighters get this, bards might get this. This is a fighting style called defense, and it just gives the guard a +1 bonus to its AC. It's already included, it's just there to explain to you where that bonus is coming from. So let's look at these actions. So for the city guards, they use long swords, and they have a weapon mastery from the new 2024 D&D book called SAP. So essentially what it does is when a larger, smaller creature is hit with this weapon, it has disadvantage on its next attack roll before the start of the guard's next turn. So every hit that the guard does gives you disadvantage on your next attack roll. So that's pretty good. Gonna be a little annoying for the players or whoever the guards are attacking, but it makes sense. If they are trained with weapons, they're going to know how to use them efficiently. So for the guards with long swords, they can do a stab or a slash attack. With versatile, so they could one or two-hand it. Obviously if they're two-handing, it does more damage. And then I gave them a half sword stab. So this is whenever the guard is holding the actual blade and the handle and stabbing into the creature with it. So they can only do this two-handed, so they can't have their shield out if they're using this in this way. Now this does less damage, but when it hits the creature that's medium or smaller, the creature has to succeed on a DC 12 strength save, and if it fails, it is shoved back 5 feet and is staggered. Now I will put up on screen what staggered does. In my Discord, I have a conditions list that tells you what all of the conditions that I put on my creature stat blocks do. The reason why I don't have reminder text is because it takes up way too much space on the stat blocks. So you can remove that if you don't want to try to memorize a custom condition that I've created, but I feel like it adds to the creature stat block personally. Moving on, they also have light crossbows now, so they have actual ranged attacks to deal with your player characters that are sitting on a flying broom 120 feet in the air, shooting arrows down at them. They can actually shoot back. So they have just a simple iron bolt attack, and it does 1d8 +1 piercing damage. Nothing to write home about, but in numbers can actually deal viable range damage. Now, the city guards have iron banded clubs. So these are clubs with iron bands that are welded around them that give them more weight and damage. So these clubs deal a flat extra 2 damage on a hit, so they can bash. And then they have pacifying smash. So remember, these are guards. These are police force in most cases. So unless you're using this like a bodyguard, but this is a police force. That's what we're looking at city guards like. So this just does just the strength mod damage wise. And then a medium or smaller creature has to succeed on a DC 12 con save. On a failure, it is stunned until the end of the guard's next turn. However, if the guard tries to spam this against you, you have advantage on the save if any guard has already attempted to stun you before the start of your next turn as a player character. So you get diminishing returns if you're trying to spam stun somebody. So that way you're actually incentivized to not spam that against your player characters. Their shield attack has an additional thing it can do, so it still has the shield shove, and now they also have pin. So this only works if the creature's prone. So on a hit, a medium or small creature is pinned to the ground under the shield, and it is considered grappled, and the escape DC is 12. So it's like they knock you to the ground, they hold you down with the shield, and keep you on the ground. Now, that and the pacifying smash play off of this next piece of equipment called manacles. Now, these are actual giant iron cuffs that medieval guards would use, or, you know, fantasy guards, because this is a fantasy game. So manacles are a lot more difficult to get out of compared to rope, obviously. So it does the same thing, except if you're not being grappled, you can use your action to attempt to break the manacles a number of times equal to half your con mod, rounded up, per day. The escape DC is now 25, so you either have to roll a nat 20 or you have to roll a 19 plus to equal 25 or over. If the save fails by 5 or more, you gain a point of exhaustion, and it caps out at 3rd level, so you can't go above 3rd level exhaustion, because you're really struggling to try to break out of this. You're literally trying to snap iron in half to bust out, so it's going to take a great feat of strength, and it's going to put a lot of exertion into that. So, and this only happens if it fails by 5 or more. So, I mean, honestly, if you roll anything less than a 20, you're going to fail by 5 or more. So it gets worse. The more you try to spam break out of these, it gets harder. So you can still do the acrobatics checks to pull your hands to the front. It's a DC 20 instead of, I believe it was DC 15 on the other guard. They can still shackle you, but now when you're shackled, it's an even higher, nearly impossible escape DC of 30 to break out. And then you also gain exhaustion if you fail by 5 or more. So you're pretty much going to gain a point of exhaustion if you fail trying to break out. But there's a chance that you don't if you have a high enough strength mod. Now, this is where it's slightly easier to break out, because manacles can be unlocked with a DC 15 sleight of hand check using thieves' tools, or the guard's key can unlock it without requiring a check. Then I just say every guard has a key for their manacles. So the rogues and the bards, or whoever is good with thieves' tools, can utilize their lockpicking skills and bust you out if they need to. So that gives rogues more things to do. So if, you know, the fighter and the barbarian get into a tavern brawl and they get arrested, the rogue can sneak up, pick the lock on the manacles, break them out. So that's going to conclude the regular average city guard. Let's keep moving. All right, so every city needs a guard captain, right? Or if you're in a big enough city, there's probably going to be multiple guard captains. So this guy is going to make fighting guards much more difficult. He's definitely going to be prime target number 1 if you're fighting a group of guards, or you get, you know, a wanted level inside of a city and now the guards are on you. So the guard captain has plate armor, which makes sense. He should probably have the best armor. His hit points are exponentially higher at 75. His ability scores are all pretty decent across the board. He has no negatives. He has 3 saving throw proficiencies, now including charisma, because you have to be somewhat charismatic as a guard captain. You're going to have to be able to talk to your men, give them orders, tell them what to do. They still have the skill proficiencies. They are clocked in at a CR 8. Probably could be higher than that, could be lower. It depends on how you interpret some of this stuff. So they have arrest and pack tactics. That's the same. They have defense, but now the guard captain has indomitable. So this is a fighter ability. If they fail a roll, they can re-roll it 3 times a day. They have to use the new roll though. Action surge. You guys, if you're fighters, you know what Action Surge does. So he can take an additional action on top of his regular action and possible bonus action. So yeah, that makes him sort of dangerous. Commanding officer. So if you were looking at the levy of militia, this guy can actually count as a commanding officer. However, you can make anything that you deem appropriate a quote-unquote commanding officer, but I just wanted to give the guard captain a specific special trait that is called commanding officer. So what it does is Allies within 60 feet of the captain, who can hear it, have advantage on saving throws against being frightened, and they add the guard's charisma mod to their attack rolls. Now that's pretty dangerous. So that's additional +3 to their attack rolls when this guard captain is nearby. So that's pretty good. He makes for a good, essentially just a walking totem that buffs everybody around him in 60 feet, in a 60-foot radius. Let's move to his action. So the guard captain has multi-attack. He has a great sword, so he makes 2 great sword attacks, and then he uses leadership if he's able to. And we'll get into that soon. So let's look at his great sword. So he has a really finely made great sword. He has a sharpened great sword. So his attacks with his great sword crit on rolls of 19 or 20. He can stab and slash with it. He has a half sword stab, much like the long sword. However, this does a d6 piercing damage. Medium or smaller creatures must succeed on a DC 14 strength save. If they fail, they are shoved back 5 feet and staggered. He has a recharge ability called Strike of Justice. It's a recharge 6. It does 3d6 piercing or slashing damage, and if you're a larger, smaller creature, you have to make a con save. If you fail, you fall prone and you're stunned until the end of the captain's next turn. I couldn't really think of what else to add. I wanted him to just have at least something that made him pretty dangerous in melee, so that was what I came up with. But if you guys have some suggestions for other types of abilities, you can leave them in the comments. I love reading comments and getting ideas from other perspectives. So he also has a light crossbow if he needs to join the troops in volleying at the ranger on the flying broom. He can do that. Now here's his special equipment. He doesn't have manacles because the guard captain's probably not patrolling the streets, so he's not going to carry around manacles, but this is a dangerous piece of equipment here. So he has alert. He blows into the horn, alerting all guards in a 1-mile radius. Reinforcements arrive within 1d4 rounds. The reinforcements consist of 1d6 plus 3 contingents of guards. These guards act on the captain's initiative when they arrive, and it says the maximum amount of guards able to be summoned a day depends on the size of the city, so that's up to you to decide. So if you're in a metropolis, you can only imagine how many troops are actually in the entire guard force, so that's up to you to decide. But he can summon a lot of troops with this ability, especially if there's multiple guard captains. So his final action is leadership. Now he uses this as part of his multi-attack. He directs an ally within 60 feet that can hear him, and he chooses one of these 3 things. The first one is strike, and that creature uses its reaction to make a weapon attack. He uses march. That creature uses its reaction to move up to its speed, and then he has rally, and he bolsters the resolve of its ally, and he gives it temp HP equal to his charisma mod, which is 3, and it ends any fear or morale effects it's suffering from. So if the levy of militia are retreating, he can stop them from retreating by using rally. Now, I also made other Horde stat blocks for the guards. I just am not featuring every single Horde stat block on this video because it would be too long, but you will have access to them. They're just not featured in the video. So we have a single bonus action. I think it's time we start giving creatures things like healing potions. So as a bonus action, the guard has 1 healing potion he can drink per day as part of his special equipment. He uses drink potion. He regains hit points equal to a superior healing potion, which is 8d4 plus 8 hit points. And then, that's only once per day, but it comes in clutch if he needs to use that. Or if you're a rogue and you go to pickpocket him, you could probably steal one of his special equipments off of him. So just gives you some extra things to play around with. Now, I have many other guards that I have created for you that you will be able to see off the video on the Patreon or the Discord, but I'm gonna showcase one final guard, and this one was a requested one that I decided to make last minute. So let's get into the final guard in this video. Bastion Giant. Okay, so you know who you are if you requested this in my YouTube comment section. This is a city guard, a Bastion Giant. So this is a hill giant that has been tamed to work for a guard force in a city. Now, this is going to be a very rare occurrence because hill giants are very stupid and they're not typically capable of complex thought enough to not want to just eat the humans around him. However, if given enough food and, you know, trained and tamed enough, I'm pretty sure any creature could become a guard if the guards were, you know, willing to put the work in. Any living creature, I will say. So you can't make a zombie guard, but let's look at the Bastion Giant. So this giant has half plate on. He has 105 hit points. He can move at a stride of 60 feet, which is a lot. He has a strength of 21, a dexterity of 8, a constitution of 19, intelligence of 7, slightly higher than a normal hill giant. Normal hill giants only have an intelligence of 5, so he's become slightly smarter, but he's still very stupid. His wisdom is a 9, his charisma is a 6, his saving throw proficiencies make sense. Their strength and constitution, being that he's a giant, he's probably going to be good at strength and constitution. He has an intimidation proficiency and perception. So you'll see in the special traits, he does retain Ordning's hierarchy, but he doesn't have his Ordning of Gluttony anymore. He still has Arrest, and his fighting style is defense. Let's look at his actions. So he has a multi-attack. Now, this is my first pseudo-giant rework with my new style of doing creature reworks, so you guys will have to let me know what you think. These are yet to be tested, so I don't know how overpowered or underpowered these may or may not be. So let's go here into the first thing. They have a huge studded Great Club. It just does 3d8 damage on a hit, and if you're large or smaller, you are crippled. I will put on screen what crippled does. It makes sense if you're a smaller creature than a 30-foot giant and you get hit with what is essentially a tree branch, you're going to be injured from that. Even though D&D 5e is a hero-esque game where you're supposed to suspend disbelief, I think stuff like that kind of adds to fighting something that is much larger than you. And then its rechargeability is Cleaving Swing. This is the same as it was on a Hill Giant stat block that I made. He does a Reckless Sweep with its Great Club, and then every creature that is within 10 feet of it has to make a dex save. If it fails, it takes 4d8 bludgeoning damage and it's knocked prone. If the creature is huge or larger and it fails that save, it takes the damage but it doesn't get knocked prone, and then the giant has to succeed on a dex save or it itself falls prone. So it's just a reckless hill giant swinging its club. Now, this is an interesting weapon here. Next, we have a heavy ballista. So the giant Bastion guard is literally carrying a piece of siege equipment as part of its weaponry. So the interesting thing about this is it doesn't have a modifier to its damage roll. So it's just 6d8 piercing damage flat, so no plus or minuses. And if you're huge or smaller, here's where the heavy damage comes in. You have 3 stacks of bleeding on you. So each stack of bleeding is 2 points of piercing damage at the end of your turn. So 3 stacks of that would mean 2, 4, 6. So every time you get hit with the heavy ballista, you're taking 6 points of piercing damage at the end of your turn until you heal that bleeding. And then you have to make a strength save or you get knocked prone. I think that makes absolute 100% sense, being that you're getting shot with a literal piece of siege equipment. So yeah, I think it's a cool weapon for the giant to have. Now here's where the big change comes in when we move to the fist. So he has a giant punch attack, and now the punch can cripple you if you are large or smaller. So if he punches your horse or he punches you, you're going to get crippled from that until you receive magical healing. The grab action, I've changed snatch into grab, and it is now part of the fist attack. So this does not require an attack roll. This is a special action. So the giant can technically do this twice a turn. I don't know how much more dangerous that's going to make him, but it is yet to be tested, but I think it actually would make him a lot more dangerous. So I was kind of hesitant to do this, but I'm just going to play test it. Screw it. We can't figure out how strong something is until we play test it. So essentially, you are forced to make a dexterity save. If you fail, you get grabbed by the giant. So you are grappled and restrained. I put an escape DC in there now so you know what you need to escape. And then the giant cannot grapple another creature with that hand or swing its two-handed weapon. So the studded gray club is a two-handed weapon, so he cannot use that anymore while he's holding somebody in his other hand. He can still have it hanging over his shoulder, but he can't swing it because he needs both of his hands on it to swing it. Let's move on to Transportation Gibbet. This is a special equipment. If the giant is holding you, he can use his action to imprison you in this gibbet that he's got hanging from his equipment belt. So if you're large or smaller and you're a humanoid, he can stuff you into his gibbet, and you are grappled, you're restrained, you cannot cast spells with somatic components or use your hands as you are bound within the cage. And then I also have a thing that says you can unlock the cage door to escape if you have thieves' tools or somebody else has thieves' tools. However, you can't use your hands to unlock it yourself. Somebody else has to save you. So yeah, pretty cool. I think that makes sense. If the guards are really having trouble with somebody, they're going to call in the city guard Bastion giant as the transportation tool to get that really dangerous barbarian from one end of the city to the other for trial. And then we have, yes, Stomp enjoyers, Stomp is never leaving, don't worry. So for his foot, he can use his Stomp attack, which when he hits you, you have to make a strength save, and on a failure, you fall prone under the weight of his foot. Obviously, you gotta have Stomp on a giant stat block, right? And now he still has Squash, which is his hill giant ability. He throws his weight down recklessly and he lands prone. Any large or smaller creature in his space must make a DC 17 dex save. On a failure, you take 6d6 bludgeoning damage. You are grappled, restrained, blinded, prone, and you have total cover. You are also suffocating. And the escape DC is 17 until the giant stands up. On a successful save, you can move to an unoccupied space within 5 feet of the giant. So he's going to use this if he's got some really unruly creatures that he's trying to subdue. Now imagine the guards come running up. Your wizard casts a fireball in the giant's face. And out of pure frustration, he's just going to belly flop on top of you until more guards get there so they can help him in restraining you in some way. So I think it's a flavorful thing to keep on the hill giant. And then for his bonus actions, if he's grappling you, he can pacifying squeeze you, which he just starts squeezing you and crushing you a little bit to get you to stop struggling or trying to hurt him or hurt others around you. And then he can still throw you. So if you're really, really being a bad adventurer, he can still throw you up to 60 feet and then throw you into somebody else even. So that's going to conclude the featured stat blocks in this video. As I said, I do have plenty others that I've made. They're just not going to be featured in the video so that these creature reworks are more digestible for everybody. So, thank you all for watching. This is DM Dungeon Mastery, not saying good night. I'm just saying. I'll see you in the next one.